Well, welcome again to another Workshop Wednesday brought to you by schoolbookkeeping.com, where it's casual conversations for serious workflows. And speaking of casual conversations, Rachel Dalchi, who's been our guest here, is very casually on vacation and still joined us for the workshop today. So where are you today?
Well, hi, Dan. I'm in northern Michigan. And first of all, we don't really ever get vacations with minor children. So I just wanted to remind you of that. We're on a trip, but I still have to work. So, yeah, northern Michigan. But you're in Wisconsin.
Yes, we are beelining our way from the Pacific Northwest to Pennsylvania in a week and working at the same time. So, my home is literally packed up behind me. So sorry for the sorry for that if you're watching. But we're going to be continuing, and Carrie actually just got back from her vacation, so I think she's doing the vacation after the vacation thing. So she may be joining us, rolling in on two wheels like she normally does. But if not, here we are. We are going to continue our conversation, and I apologize last week for the internet problems that we were having. But now it seems to be working out much better here in an undisclosed location in uh, in Wisconsin. I guess it's the cheese. We'll credit the cheese here. Wonderful cheese curds.
Yeah, I think they
in
have this in
Wisconsin.
Michigan too. And where I am right now, I think they've got really good fudge. So,
Oh, fudge
yeah.
and cheese curds.
Yes, it's the fudge.
All right. As much as it would delight me to talk about fudge and cheese, the remaining workshop, we do want to actually talk about something dealing with e-commerce. So this is our third segment of the e-commerce fundamentals. We talked about, what is e-commerce in the first one. Now last week we talked about the components of a business selling in an e-commerce space. And now we want to talk about something that nobody wants to talk about: sales tax.
Yep.
This is, from my experience when I worked at Intuit for 18 years, sales tax and our next week's inventory, those were two topics that accounting professionals just ran screaming from. Like it's like, I do not want to touch either of those two. What is your opinion of sales tax and why it might be such a touchy subject for a lot of businesses as well as accounting professionals?
Well, I think mainly because of the fact that we live in the United States where we have 50 different states. So it adds a little bit of complexity considering each state has its own rules and regulations. And so it's a little bit like, where do I even start? And I think traditional businesses, I just mean non e commerce businesses where you're potentially selling it over many different states. Traditional businesses that are really just dealing with sending invoices and maybe just dealing with the state that they live in. Whatever they're doing may or may not even be taxable. So it's usually not a big thing. And so when you think of starting an e-commerce store, or I actually just got a new client that they bought a fully functional store. So they didn't start
Oh,
it. They walked in on one that was already functioning. So it's just can be very overwhelming and complex. And so that's why it's really helpful to learn, at least at a fundamental level, sort of what are all the things involved. And then if you have a basic understanding of that, then you can maybe start dealing with things one item by one item, and then it doesn't need to be so daunting.
Right. Now we had a series where our friends over at Avalara came on, and we really unpacked um, the sales tax fundamentals. And Landon's going to send that link in the comments there. So if you want to check out those workshops that we had with Avalara, but we really broke it down into three, and technically there's four um, caveats or main concerns when it comes with sales tax: what you sell,
Mm-hmm.
where you sell it, and who you sell it to. Right. So there's kind of like a Venn diagram of of those three things. The sometimes why, if this is vowels, right? AEIOU.
Mm-hmm.
The sometimes why is
Yeah.
when you sell it, because
Yeah.
some states will have sales tax holidays or
Mm-hmm.
things like that add that other layer of complexity. But I think what ultimately makes this so complicated, and you alluded to it, right? There's 50 states, and all 50 states make up their own mind when it comes to sales tax, because there's 5 states that don't charge sales
Mm-hmm.
tax,
Nomad.
right?
Yeah.
So now there's right.
Nomad is
So now there's
the whatever you call that thing. The
no, yeah, the mnemonic device,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Is that what
yeah,
is that what it
yeah.
is? The acronym.
Acronym. That's there we
There we go.
go.
So those are the 5 states that don't, and the first one is New Hampshire, but there's so many news. So
No, I
like,
don't think
how
it's New
is it
Hampshire.
New?
It's North Dakota, Oregon,
Oh, right,
Montana, Alaska, and um,
Delaware.
Delaware. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Okay, right.
yeah, not New
For
Hampshire.
some reason, I thought New Hampshire. See, that's the thing, is there's so many states that start with N,
Yeah, and then
to
in
know which.
Alaska, there's a couple exceptions to the rule, certain counties. But
Oh
I
yeah,
did want to just jump in and say really quick too, because there are some folks out there that are really specialized and um, very, very knowledgeable at sales tax, and so you can always get into the specifics and nitty gritty, and there's always an exception to the rule, and there's all kinds of
hmm
I'm sure we're going to get into apps. There's some people that really need to make sure that the apps are all calculating correctly. And so I just wanted to say that there's always that going on. And I think you and I had mentioned for this purpose, we really just kind of want to stay in the upper level and just kind of
right,
really make sure that we're not getting so
yeah,
much into the weeds with those things. But there are definitely if we say something that maybe is a little too general, just know, yes, absolutely, it can get more specific. But for generalized speaking, we want to talk about the things that, let's say, you are new to e-commerce or just bought an e-commerce store or just expanding
right,
into multi-channel or maybe just into Shopify where all of a sudden you have the obligation. It's really meant for that level.
right. Yes, and that's really the high level, that because this is a topic that we can dive into those weeds really quickly. Um, I had Avalara come on the QB Power Hour, and the topic was the weird, wacky world of sales tax, right? Where you know you get to the nitty gritty. In Colorado, you could have next door neighbors in 2 different sales tax jurisdictions.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
for
that
sure.
is terrible.
Yeah, and in one example is they just made a big change here in Michigan to sales tax. It used to have to be that, and I'll just give this quick example that if you sold goods, but you also supplied the labor and installation with those goods, you had to then charge sales tax on the labor and installation, which is very unusual. But then they just did away with that. So that is what I'm
Right.
talking about, all these different specifics. You don't need to know all of those different things. I would say, at the very, very least, when we're talking about e commerce, you don't want to get caught not collecting sales tax for a long period of time because then you
Right.
still are obligated to make that payment and file that return based on what did
Right.
you collect. Nothing. That's going to come out of your pocket. So, in today's world of sales tax obligation, it always boils down to you need to enable your settings on whatever system you're working in. If you're just working out of QuickBooks Online, you want to make sure that you're enabling your sales tax settings correctly. If you're working out of Shopify or WooCommerce or some kind of platform, you want to make sure that you know that you need to collect sales tax and you're enabling those settings correctly. And then I'm sure we'll get into also if you're selling on a marketplace that you're not obligated for sales tax, you still want to record that coming in and out of your books properly. So there's certain, a lot of differences between those things, but of those things, the most important thing is if you need to collect and you're selling a high volume of stuff in a state where you have to, you better start collecting it.
Right, because they don't take kindly for you to being subject to collecting it and then not paying and remitting the
Yeah.
the sales tax, right?
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite stories is I had when I lived in Arizona, I had a friend who worked at the Arizona Department of Revenue, and so every month, she was in charge of manning the businesses that would come in and remit their sales tax, because typically this was before everything was e-fileable and everything, so they would come downtown and remit their sales tax payments and give them their forms, and inevitably every month, it was like clockwork. She could set a clock to it. There would be at least one business that would come in and say, I can't afford to pay sales tax. Right? And let's unpack that statement there, Rachel, because that sentence doesn't make sense, right? Because of why? Why does that? Why do you laugh when when someone says I can't afford to pay? When a business says I can't afford to pay sales tax?
Well, from an accounting point of view, this isn't coming out of your pocket. So let's say I'm a merchant and I'm selling at, or I have a small shop, a trinket shop or something here, and I also sell it online. I am selling items to my customers, and I'm going to add on a sales tax that I need to be collecting from them by law. So if I live in Michigan, the law says that I have to collect sales tax on certain things. And usually in most of those states, it's stuff that I sell or prepared food. And so if I'm a retailer, not if I'm a wholesaler, we won't even get into that right now. But if I'm a retailer, I have to collect a sales tax. So let's say the item is $10 and the sales tax is 8%. So then I need to collect 80 cents. So I'm going to collect $10.80. And then I'm going to put that 80 cents into a liability account and then hold that with all my other sales tax payable. And then at the quarter end or month end or year end, even just depending on what my state says, I'm then going to make that payment to them. So it's really just a reserve. It's I've already collected that from my customer, held it in a reserve, and then I'm just going to pass it on and pay it to the state. So this isn't an expense for me.
Right.
No, not a penny should be coming out of my pocket. This is money that I have collected from my customers.
So fundamentally, since we're talking about sales tax fundamentals, so fundamentally, sales tax is a liability. You are withholding that 80 cents of every sale, or that 8% or whatever that rate is, and you are holding on to that and then paying it later.
Yes.
And depending on or remitting it to the state later, depending on your frequency, right? That could be monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on how much of the liability you've accrued over the course of a period of time. So here's where businesses tend to have a misconception about that, is they look at what's in the balance of their bank account, which is inclusive of that 80 cents, and go, I got this money to spend, and they spend it. And then, later on, the monthly, quarterly, annually, they come, oh, I know I owe sales tax. Oh no, I spent the state's money.
Yeah.
uh, and that's where that statement comes from. I can't afford to pay sales taxes because they spent the state's money. This
Right.
is really what it boils down to. And that was her answer to the question, or, to the
Yeah.
complaint, is that, what are you doing spending our money?
Yeah, I mean, and
Right.
that's a cash flow issue, obviously. I
Right.
mean, you should, as a business owner, you should know when your sales tax payments are coming up, and then. But now, of
Right.
course, we have tools that help with that. There are different things that can be used
Right.
to set aside
Yep.
that money and make sure that you have that. But yeah, and so then when we talk about e-commerce, it's just basically that same concept, but at the selling online level. So
Right.
I'm collecting from my buyers in various states. And so you really have to adhere to what those various states are saying. But I want to ask you a question, Dan. So, how
Mm.
do I know how frequent I may need to file? How would I even know that?
Yeah. Right. And that's part of the challenge, is that ultimately the burden of knowing all this stuff comes back to whom? The
Well,
business owner.
the business owner, yeah. So if they
Right? Because your
know
name's on
that
the door. Your name's on
exactly,
the
and
door. Your name's on the AIN,
yeah,
and so the burden of
every
knowing all this stuff comes back to the business owner to know
yeah,
that.
in every
Now,
single
every state,
state.
I think we're
I
going
was
to
just
say
going
the
to say,
same thing.
yeah, I was just going to say every state finds you to be responsible for that, and they'll come
Right.
after you for it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
um,
school of bookkeeping example, right? We have, so we're going to talk about a little bit about Nexus, right? So,
mhm,
school of bookkeeping has a physical presence in 3 different states,
mhm,
right? So, in the grand scheme of things, school of bookkeeping is liable to tell those states about their sales activities, because we have a physical presence in each of those states. Now, physically, I'm in Wisconsin today, but that doesn't mean that I'm physically here collecting funds, right? So,
right,
um, on paper, I live in Florida, so that's Florida State. Florida State, South Carolina, and California are the 3 physical locations that we have to set up things. Um, South Carolina says, "Hey, we need to remit monthly." Florida says, "Hey, we need to remit file quarterly," and California, oddly enough, says yearly.
yeah.
So,
Mine's yearly in California too. So I have
yeah,
Nexus in Michigan, where I live, Indiana, where I have an employee, in California, where I have employees. So it's that this is a really interesting thing because that puts me in those states as having economic nexus, and so that
yeah,
means that when I ship anything, because my business net deposited, we sell swag, so bookkeeping
yeah,
and accounting swag. So if anybody buys that online from Michigan, Indiana, or California, because it's based on ship address, and for you, if anybody buys in Florida, South Carolina, and California, then you have to remit and complete a return for those states based on their frequency.
right.
But my further
That
question is,
doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that everything is taxable that you sell in
no,
there. It
no,
just means you have to tell the states.
just for
Yeah,
taxable items. And so, and
yeah,
usually the states will ask, okay, well, what are your grand total of your sales? What are your
yeah.
taxable amount of your sales? And then what's your actual taxable amount? It's pretty straightforward, but you do have to register in those
Right,
states. So just
right.
not even registering doesn't, you
So,
can't claim ignorance. You have to register with the
yeah,
Department of Revenue or
I
whatever
didn't
in those
know only
states.
only goes so far.
Yeah. So you do have to go on as a business owner and register in those states that you have Nexus in, and then get the filing number and register for their online portal and all of the things. But if you're looking at Nexus in many different states, there are services that can register for you, such as Avalara. You had
Right.
mentioned you had that, and that's probably an in-depth conversation for another time. But there are
Yeah.
options to, let's say I'm too busy, I can't register and take the time to do all that. You can pay a service like that to
Right.
register based on the requirements.
Now, years ago, there was, everybody wanted to go to, let's buy, I'll go shopping, right? I find something I want to shop or want to buy, and then immediately turn around and order it on Amazon because Amazon didn't charge sales tax.
I
This was
remember that. It was
right.
awesome.
Like, oh gosh, I'm going to do that, and then all of a sudden, poof! Amazon starts charging sales tax in all 45
Yeah.
states that collect it because of this ruling that happened went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was Wayfair, not Amazon, but Wayfair versus South Dakota,
Yep.
and basically this was all because of the behavior that was happening. Of you would go shop for something local in a store, find it on Amazon, buy it there because you could avoid the sales tax as a consumer,
Hmm.
right? Because this whole idea of e-commerce and sales tax just kind of never came into the conversation until somebody forced the issue, and that
Yeah.
somebody was the state of South Dakota,
Yeah. It
right?
was kind of the Wild West. And then South
Yeah,
Dakota, among other states, decided,
yeah,
I don't like this. We want our money. If you want to sell
right,
to people in our state, you're going to pay.
right. Which made this now more complicated for people who do sell online,
Hmm.
because it entered into this idea, and you alluded to it, this economic nexus versus physical nexus.
Hmm.
And the result of the ruling was just, hey, every state make up your own rules, right?
Yeah.
when it comes when it comes to e-commerce selling, somebody who's not physically in your state, that doesn't have a physical presence, um, which caveat, right? If you have something that causes you, it's not just a person. You could also have inventory
Yeah.
located in a, in a
Yeah.
state, and that constitutes a physical presence,
Yeah.
right? So you got to know where everything that is dealing with your business is physically located, not just the people, but also the things that may constitute a physical location, because my physical location is in Florida. I'm not physically there, right?
Yeah.
So it's,
Exactly. And
but
typically it's employees will put you
yeah,
in physical nexus
right,
into another state. So yep.
right. So you've got this idea of physical nexus, which basically says to the state, hey, you need to at least register and remit some kind of sales tax document on whatever frequency is necessary,
Even if it's a $0, and you
right?
haven't sold anything in there yet or nothing taxable, you would
Right.
still have to do a $0 return if you have an obligation.
So now, so now there's this other idea of, hey, there's an economic nexus, and maybe there is a substantial amount of customers that you are selling to in that state, and now that constitutes that threshold of, hey, you're now basically doing business in our state, even
Yeah.
though nothing around about your business is in our state,
Yeah,
right?
because the
But your
states
products are in our state.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the states, I believe, very rightfully so. We're like, we
Yeah,
want that sales tax income. We want that money. You're doing commerce in our state, and we're allocating services for that. We have to
right.
upkeep the roads
There's
for, to make them
the
deliverable.
delivery. Yep.
So yeah, and you're so right. Every single one of those states has a different what they call it is look back period to determine
Right.
what is their what do they have to hit or fulfill before
Mhm.
they hit that economic nexus? And every single state's different. Some of them you look back the previous calendar year. Some of them you look back like the immediate last 12 months. Some you have to sell $100,000 worth of goods in the
Right.
previous calendar year. Sometimes it's 150,000 worth of dollars worth of goods in the last 12 months. Sometimes it's just number of transactions. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's not a dollar amount at all.
Yeah. So
And
it could
some,
be a combination of the number of
yeah,
transactions or the
yeah,
dollar amount or both.
yeah.
And
And
it
it's
could be,
really,
they could set it up as like, the lesser of two. So if you
yeah,
have
yeah,
20
yeah,
transactions or 200 transactions or
yeah,
whatever the transaction threshold is, whichever you get to first,
yeah,
right? So you could have a small dollar amount, but then number of transactions,
yeah,
and then that
exactly.
constitutes that threshold.
Yeah. And then I have these high volume sellers that, they have these little low dollar things they sell. So they could hit those number of transactions. And I have other people that even if they are pretty high volume, they still it's going to take them a long time to hit these thresholds. It's not easy to hit. It takes time. So
Yeah.
really depending. I mean, you have to be a really high volume store to hit Nexus in all 50 states. It's not something that can happen overnight. And luckily, a lot of these apps, including Shopify as a platform, they have Nexus trackers built in, so you can track
Right.
and see where you are. And like Shopify, for instance, will say you're 60% of hitting in Ohio based on their look back period. And
Right.
so, luckily, all those tools are there. Otherwise, you'd have to go and do the math and figure it out and go on the
Right.
individual websites and see. So, these are really lifesavers. So that you can track to see, because then you'll know, okay, I'm at 80% now. I know that once I hit that, I have to enable my system, like I said earlier, turn that on in my system to start collecting sales tax at
Right.
checkout for buyers in that state. And that's really like all it is you have to make sure that your, Stripe or Shopify or whatever method you're using knows to collect sales tax in those states. And again, your ignorance of not turning that on is not an excuse. So you really have to be on it.
Right. So that's kind of the idea, right? Is you've got this idea between physical nexus and an economic nexus. Now, when you're talking about an economic nexus type of thing, right? And we talked about it a little bit last week about the difference between a marketplace versus a shopping cart as far as how you're selling things online. The marketplaces, and we talked about it the first week, the marketplaces tend to take the burden of that because they already have an economic nexus in all of those states that are required. So they take that burden of collecting and remitting the sales tax for you on your behalf. So the places like
Exactly.
Amazon, Walmart, I don't know, does
Etsy.
Sears even have a does Sears even
I
have
don't
a marketplace
know.
anymore? Do they even
I
exist?
don't know. I don't know. I don't think Sears exists anymore. But
I have a really bad story about Sears Marketplace, so I know there's a marketplace for it. But
I know. Well, see, a lot
anyway,
of these major chain retailers are also adding their own marketplaces, such as Michaels, and then
hmm
there's Wayfair, and there's all kinds of different furniture and design marketplaces. But typically, like you said earlier, with Amazon, with that example, they once that ruling went into place and Amazon had to start collecting sales tax. Amazon says, and I'm guessing not out of the goodness of their heart, they were probably like bullied into it somehow. But they said, okay, fine, we're now a marketplace facilitator. We will collect the sales tax for you, and then we'll remit it to all the states for you. So you don't have to collect that being an Amazon seller. Let's say you only sell on Amazon. Go ahead.
but there's a yeah, but see, this is where we can really dive into the weeds,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
The thing with the marketplace, and especially with Amazon not only will allow you to sell, but they will also allow you. They can also be a fulfillment,
Oh,
right?
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah,
So what we had mentioned before about where your inventory is located. If your inventory is physically located at an Amazon fulfillment center that you didn't know, and sometimes they can move shit around, right? Like
yeah,
they can they can move it around for you because they realize, oh, um, this guy's selling a lot of stuff on the East Coast. Well, let's move his stuff over there,
yeah,
so it's a lot
yeah,
easier. It takes the burden off of our shipping and that sort of stuff because Amazon is basically a fulfillment center, UPS as well as as an online
yeah,
marketplace as well, and they're very good at efficiencies. So they may move your stuff without you knowing to another fulfillment center. Now, physically, your inventory is located in another state that you didn't even know. So
yeah.
even though they're collecting and remitting sales tax for you, you actually should be remitting the sales tax filings because your inventory is physically located in an Amazon fulfillment center in a state that you didn't even know existed. right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those, really granular things that you really need to keep, pay attention to as a business owner that is selling online, even though you're like, okay, well, marketplace, they're handling the sales tax for me, but wait, so
Yeah,
there's
like if you're on typical Amazon or you're on Etsy or something like that, you usually when I'm
right,
using an automation tool for recording those sales, it usually involves sales tax collected, and then the sales tax goes right back out. So we're tracking it, and we know that it's happening, but the liability doesn't stay
right,
on our books. So it's and that is a selling point for those marketplaces, that they're like, hey, come sell with us. We charge a crazy amount of fees, but you don't have to worry about sales tax. So it's just one
right,
of those. I wrote an article on my blog about positives and negatives about selling on Amazon. And it's just one of those things where, because I have different people ask me, like, should I sell on my own platform like Shopify? Yeah, that means I have to collect sales tax, but man, I could sell on Amazon, and then I can just pay the advertising fees. But then you're like, oh gosh, advertising fees, listing fees, all, and on and on and on. And
storage
then
fees,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So the cut that you get from Amazon is much less than you'd get on a platform that you're selling on. But then again, you have to pay for your own advertising,
right,
you have to pay for your own whatever, and you have to collect your own sales tax and remit it. But man, if you can really get, as a seller, if you can get really good at really understanding all of the elements of your business and what you have to do, and be really savvy and sharp at that, and then you're working with somebody who's really knowledgeable about what needs to be done with e-commerce, like me. Just kidding. Um, and, and Dan,
uh-huh.
then you're really in a good spot,
Yeah,
because we can recommend the right tools. We can have all the information, not all, but most of the information needed about the differences between these platforms and marketplaces. And you can really get sell multi-channel quite skillfully if you can really understand some of these basics. And again, you don't have to know the individual differences of all the states, because a lot of these apps have it all built in. And so,
right,
and like I said earlier, I mean, it never hurts to have, experts maybe double check it and make sure that, everything is accurate and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it's really quite easy now. The barrier, like as Shopify likes to say, the barrier of entry is essentially removed. You can now sell easily than ever before.
yeah. And I think to kind of summarize, or come in for a landing, because I'm looking at the chat and the comments, and nobody's saying a damn thing,
No.
because either we have bored people to tears, and they have, or again, like, people just don't want to touch this sales tax. It's like a sleeping bear that you don't want to disturb. You don't want to disturb that. So, I mean, when it comes down to e-commerce and sales tax, there's this whole idea of physical versus economic nexus, and then it goes into that whole matrix of who do you sell to, where do you sell it to, and when do you sell it, all those things, because now you need to make sure that you're collecting the right rate when you do cross that threshold of, hey, I need to
Yeah.
collect sales tax in this state. Um, what's the right rate to do? Because it could be, a luxury item, or something that has a
Yeah.
threshold, or
Yeah, and
things
that's
like that.
a really good point, because in my previous life, I used to do a ton of luxury tax in California, and so California specifically with sales tax also is its own beast. So it's really and I'll leave my final thought with kind of that, because this is something that's really important. And when I first started, and I just kind of listened to people say things, never take somebody's I had a client tell me, oh, I only have to collect sales tax and blah blah blah, and it's only based on this address. And I really wasn't that much of an expert, and so I just said okay, and I just took their word for it. So never take anybody's word for anything. Research it. Avalara's website is incredible with all kinds of different rules and regulations, and where you need to go to the various states to register for the sales tax, what the needs are, what the rates are, what your obligation is. And it's just a wealth of resources. So whatever like your client's cousin's best friend's nephew says,
Yeah.
don't listen to it.
Right. Because the whole reason that we crossed over into this sales tax conversation with School of Bookkeeping is we were going to bundle QuickBooks Online subscriptions with our service, and as it comes to find out, yeah, the whole idea of what is a QuickBooks Online subscription? Is that a service? Is that a software as a service? Is it a digital download? Is it what is it? Right. So it has to go through this whole matrix of what is this thing that I'm selling and where am I selling it? And it turns out Florida and California don't see it as a taxable event. You can look at it. But of course, South Carolina does, right? So we're
I never thought about that. I never thought about what is QuickBooks Online considered a taxable item. I don't know. Yeah. It's really weird because first of all,
because it's not like a software where you deliver a disc. There's a tangible thing to it, right? This is just a cloud-based service offering, basically.
Which is now the whole cloud-based stuff is still like people are figuring out what's what. It's the technology changes too fast for them to really understand.
Exactly. Yeah. So, bottom line, it boils down to the burden of responsibility is on the business owner. Find a resource, or whether that be a person, a website, or a tool to be able to help you with that. It could be a SALT professional, a sales and local tax person in your area to bounce these things off of, to make sure that you do the proper research for making sure whether you're not eligible, liable to collect sales tax and remit that, and don't spend the state's money.
Yeah, and those people, by the way, and there's some people that I know who are really, really sharp. They are really the ones to determine what is taxable and what isn't. I wouldn't even call up the state and talk to their, admin staff and, hey, is this taxable? Like, I'd really make sure I do due diligence and find out. And, once it is determined this is taxable, we can set that up and facilitate that to no end. But really determining what is taxable and what isn't taxable is the realm of these professionals.
Yeah, because even to the point of Avalara, right? And we used Avalara to set up our sales tax in School of Bookkeeping. They will not guarantee that it's that it's taxable. No. However, if you set it up a certain way, it will do the right calculations. So they guarantee the tax collected is correct. However, again, they don't take the burden of responsibility of knowing whether this is taxable or not. Right? That's where it comes to somebody else. And if you have that professional to be able to back you, with that decision, then that's always a good person to have in your corner.
Yeah, and I know they're really careful about not. I even have asked them before, like, what about this equipment and what about this? And they're like, get a lawyer. We can't answer that for you. So,
right, exactly. So we're going to put a button on this one because again, I think we've lulled the people that are watching to sleep when talking about sales tax. And we're going to probably do it again next time with inventory management because that's what we'll be talking about next week on the workshop about managing inventory when you're selling online. Rachel, it's always good to see you, and everybody who did join us. Thanks again for joining us. If you want to be alerted when we have another YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel, and also like and subscribe to Rachel's channel. So you get
Yeah,
you
I
get
have
two
a
for
new
one there.
YouTube channel now. Woohoo!
All right, we're helping you grow as well. Awesome. All right. Well, Rachel, we'll see you next week, and everybody else, have a great one.